This is Bob Oliphant from the Westford Historical Society and Museum, bringing you episode 7 of season 3 of the Westford Wardsman podcast. The Westford Wardsman newspaper was part of Turner's Public Spirit, a weekly newspaper in Ayer a century ago. In this episode, we'll be reading the Wardsman for the week ending Saturday, February 12th, 1910. I'll elaborate on what was happening in Westford in 1910. The Westford Center section is the first one in this issue. After February 15th, the carriers on the RFD routes, that's rural free delivery routes, will not collect pennies from their customers' boxes and with them buy and affix stamps on unstamped mail matter. This practice has grown to be a time-destroying nuisance. 3 million cents have been so collected and employed in a single year, requiring a service from the carriers, which properly belongs to the public. I'm sure that's 3 million cents across the country, not in Westford. So after the date named, persons enjoying free delivery should see that all their letters are stamped when deposited for the carrier to collect. There was no school sessions Friday, February 4th on account of the storm. Monday, the academy was closed and the teachers were away for the day visiting schools. The members of Hose Company Number 1, who went to Graniteville Monday evening, were highly pleased with their treatment there. The Graniteville Company showed themselves good sports. The meeting had a tendency toward promoting a good comradeship between the three companies that is desirable. The annual appraisal of personal property at the town farm was attended to on February 5th by H.L. Wright, Fred A. Blodgett, and William McDonald. They found a substantial increase in value over last year. This occasion regularly gives the town officials a chance to go, quote, over the hill to the poor farm, end quote. It is noticeable that an invitation from the overseers of the poor for this occasion is always accepted with alacrity. The guests also always take their appetites with them, for the spread has a reputation that is a great credit to the lady of the house. Reverend David Wallace, recently of Presque Isle, Maine, is expected to preach at the Congregational Church next Sunday. Let us say right here that it is unnecessary to telephone around Sunday morning, as was done last week, asking, is there going to be any service at the Orthodox Church? Of course there is, and every Sunday evening, the Supply Committee intend to place in the pulpit men who can preach efficiently. Candidates are apt to bring their best sermons, so everybody come regularly. I believe that this man, David Wallace, was the one that they actually selected to be the replacement minister for Mr. Marshall. Next is the Westford Grange section. At the Grange Thursday evening, there was a good attendance and much routine business accomplished. The program for the evening was in charge of the ladies, offsetting the gentlemen's entertainment of the last meeting. First, there was a bright and witty farce which depicted human nature in various ways, entitled Miss Susan's Fortune, with the following cast: Miss Susan Slant, the Heiress, by Mrs. Leonard W. Wheeler, Mrs. Wiggs, Mrs. Batters, and Mrs. Green. Fairweather Friends, by Mesdames Grieg, Knight, and Lumbert. Miss Charlotte Long, Miss Martha Grant, Maria, Miss Susan's niece, Miss Beth Cushing. Miss Susan's Farce was a comedy in one act written by Alice Thompson and published in Philadelphia in 1908. So it was a relatively new play for the time. There was also a vocal trio, Miss Laura Lumbert, Miss Cushing, and Mrs. Lillian Lumbert. Duet, Mrs. Cushing and Miss Lumbert. Piano solo, Miss Mabel Miller. Reading, Mrs. Joseph E. Knight. The next meeting, February 1st, will be Patriotic Night, with special music, and much effort will be made to make it a good program. The next section is the About Town section. Reverend Seth W. Walker of the old Walker Homestead, and well favorably known as an Advent preacher of eloquence and more recently known as the California Evangelist, is holding a series of meetings in Salem. Among the subjects discoursed upon is the, quote, Eastern or, quote, Turkish question and our, quote, our paradise home. George W. Bussey of Brookside is having another of his old-time struggles with an old-time lung trouble. This and the recent frigid zone weather has increased this close attraction for forming at the warm and cozy fireside. Alvin Poley makes no permanent gain toward recovery. A period of advance is invariably followed by reaction, while the period of gain is of no longer duration than the period of relapse. Yet the latter, like all destructive forces, tears down speedily what long patience and skill have constructed. There was no service at the Unitarian Church last Sunday owing to the illness of Reverend Bailey, who was suffering from a severe chill with pneumonia tendencies. His attending physician, Dr. Wells, succeeded in making the pneumonia tendencies have tenderly leave to withdraw. With this out of the way, the chill got a severely warm shaking up, and the preacher of righteousness is expected soon to proclaim, as of old, quote, so teach us to number our days that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom, end quote. That's a quote from Psalm 90, verse 12. Herbert E. Fletcher and Company, the Oak Hill stone contractors, have the United States government contract for building the new post office at New Orleans. Westford granite was used all over the country. I know another place that I've seen actually is the Pennsylvania State Capitol building in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Along with the sunny social business life of Oak Hill, there is an occasional reverse situation. This cloud on the fair sky of clear sailing occurred last week when Harold Fletcher, eldest child of the Honorable Herbert E. Fletcher, was taken suddenly ill at the Lowell High School. He was removed to the Lowell General Hospital, where a consultation of physicians decided it was a case of appendicitis, and a surgical operation was decided upon, which was performed by Dr. Leahy, son of Thomas H. Leahy. This is spelled Leahey, of the firm Fletcher & Leahy, assisted by Dr. J.B. Field of Lowell. Mr. Fletcher is making a steady gain toward early recovery. At present, it seems reasonably certain that he is beyond the ordinary danger point. The Flynns are improving the appearance of their already neatly trimmed farm buildings by shingling the sides of their barn at the old homestead on Pigeon Hill, Stony Brook Road. This was in the area that might have been called Little Ireland, although I don't know whether it was or not, but there were several Irish families that lived together there on Stony Brook Hill on Pigeon Hill. A large elm limb was twisted from its bearings at the homestead yard of Frank C. Drew Wednesday evening, dislocating the telephone service. The next section is called Deaths. Jonathan Collins died suddenly last Saturday evening at the home of his son, Frank Collins, at Brookside. He had been to North Chelmsford, where he was taken ill, and returned on the electric cars, being assisted to his home by the conductor and motorman, and died about 2 hours later. The funeral was from the home of his son at Brookside Tuesday afternoon. Reverend Thomas L. Fisher of the Episcopal Church of the Episcopal Mission at Ford's Village conducted the services. Mrs. John Carmichael, Jr. and Miss Teresa Lowther sang several favorite selections. The bearers were Miles Collins, James Albert, and John Dugdale. Jonathan Collins was 76 years and 4 months old and leaves a widow and 2 sons, Miles Collins, superintendent of the Abbott Worsted Mills at Ford's Village, and Frank Collins, superintendent of the George C. Moore Mills at Brookside, which were later purchased by Abbott Worsted, and 1 daughter, Mrs. James Dugdale of Haverhill, and 7 grandchildren. Burial was at Fairview under the direction of Undertaker David L. Grieg. While at the breakfast table last Friday morning at the home of his daughter, Mrs. Warren P. Sweetser, James Harrop, Harrop, fell to the floor and died in about 10 minutes of heart disease. The funeral was from the home of his daughter on the Acton Road, Parkerville, Monday afternoon. Reverend Dane of South Chelmsford officiated. The bearers were Warren P. Sweetser, Almond S. Vose, William L. Butterworth, and William F. Seifer. It's spelled Seifor, but I don't believe that's the correct spelling. I believe it's normally Sefer. He was a native of England and leaves a widow and 3 daughters. He was a stonecutter by trade and belonged to the Union. The floral tributes by relatives and friends was liberally appropriate. Burial was in Fairview by Undertaker David L. Grieg. The next section is the Graniteville section. The members of St. Andrew's Temperance Society held a largely attended meeting in their rooms on Wednesday night. Considerable business of importance was transacted, 2 members were initiated, and 3 applications for membership received. The Society is now planning on holding an entertainment in its rooms in the near future for the members and a few invited guests. The committee in charge of the Ladies' Aid Society, this is at the Methodist Church since it's in Graniteville, the committee in charge of the Ladies' Aid Society entertainment that was held recently has settled all bills incurred and report a balance of $31 that is now in the hands of the treasurer. The Ladies' Aid is very grateful to all those who helped in any way toward the success of the affair. Special mention being made of Fred R. Blodgett, who disposed of a large number of tickets and helped in various ways for the good of the cause. Andrew Johnson and Willie Gilson also deserve a word of praise for their good work. The large willow trees that have stood for years near the corner of Broadway and North Main Street have been cut down, and this makes a much-needed improvement as the walking was unusually very bad under these trees, particularly after a heavy rainfall. Besides, it gives a good clear view of both streets from the Mill Pond Bridge and makes it much safer for teams and automobiles coming around the corner. Who ever knew that there was a large clump of trees at that corner? At the 9:45 o'clock Mass celebrated in St. Catherine's Church on Sunday morning, the celebrant, Reverend J.J. McNamara, read the rules for the coming holy season of Lent and also gave a very instructive talk, principally on temperance. His sermon, though short, was very timely and covered the ground thoroughly. His sound logic made a deep impression on his hearers, and those who attended this Mass should feel that they were fortunate in being present. The Ladies' Aid Society of the Methodist Episcopal Church met with Mrs. Wesley O. Hawks on Thursday afternoon, February 10th at 3 o'clock. A daughter, her name was Mildred E. Brooks, but it's not given in the paper, was born to Mr. and Mrs. Charles Brooks of this village on Sunday, February 6th. Reverend Louis F. Havermale of Boston preached his first sermon in the Methodist Episcopal Church here on Sunday morning and made a good impression. The evening service was also largely attended, and the congregation had the pleasure of listening to an eloquent sermon delivered in a very able manner. Louis Frederick Havermale, born in 1886 and died in 1965, was pastor of the M.E. Church at Graniteville from 1910 to 1912. The next section is called F of A, that stands for Foresters of America. Court Graniteville 179, F of A, held a very largely attended meeting in its rooms on Thursday night with Chief Ranger T.G. Sullivan in the chair. After the business meeting was over, a very enjoyable smoke talk was held. A very substantial luncheon was served, after which the cigars were lighted, and the following program was given. Opening remarks by the Toastmaster, John Boyd. Harmonica solo, Charles Eaton. Song, Thomas Hughes. Recitation, A.R. Wall. Songs by the Imperial Quartet. composed of R.J. McCarthy, Henry LeDuc, J.B. Riney, and George McCarthy. Recitation, The Cremation of Sand. It says Sandy McGee. I'll come back to that, but I think it was Sam McGee. John Boyd. Songs, Fred Defoe, David H. Shattuck, Thomas Hughes, and John Boyd. The affair proved to be very enjoyable, and the committee in charge are to be commended for the able manner in which everything was arranged. The court is at present enjoying prosperity and looking forward to another entertainment in the near future. The Cremation of Sam McGee is the title of a lugubrious poem published in 1907 by Canadian poet Robert William Service, who was born in 1874 and died in 1958. And he was known as the Bard of the Yukon and the Canadian Kipling. The poem begins, "There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their secret tales that would make your blood run cold. The northern lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was that night on the marge of Lake Labarge, I cremated Sam McGee." You'll have to look it up and read the rest of the poem. It's a good one. Next section is called The Oldest Citizen. The subject of this sketch, James Collier, is the oldest citizen in this village, and it is thought the oldest in the town of Westford. Mr. Collier was born in Erith, Kent, England, on March 5th, 1824, and will be 86 years of age next month, and is therefore eligible for the gold-headed cane that is to be awarded to the oldest citizen in Westford. He is a brickmason by trade and worked at the business for several years in England before coming here. He has been a resident of Graniteville about 26 years. When a young man, he married Miss Susan Crowther of his hometown, and of that union 15 children were born to them. Of that number, 7 are dead, and the others are scattered in various parts of the world, some being in England, Australia, and America. Mr. Collier has 61 grandchildren now living and several great-grandchildren. His first wife died several years ago, and a few years after he was married to Mrs. Mary Bowers. There were no children from this second union. Mr. Collier retired from active work a few years ago and now makes his home with his daughter, Mrs. William Welch. He has numerous relatives in Lowell, Ayer, and a few in New Hampshire, and visits them all occasionally. He is a great man for taking long walks and always enjoyed good health. He likes to be in the open air as much as possible. He is a constant reader of the newspapers and often reads them without glasses. He is a well-informed man and a great student of the Bible. As one well-known man here remarked a short time ago, quote, "Don't get into a religious argument with Mr. Collier, for he knows the Bible from cover to cover, and he never forgot it," end quote. Mr. Collier is at present visiting relatives in Ayer, but is expected home shortly in order to fittingly observe his 86th birthday anniversary at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Welch in this village. It is sincerely hoped that the Graniteville people may enjoy the genial companionship of this young old man for many years to come, and that the town officials will not forget that he is one of the oldest, if not the oldest, citizen in the town of Westford. He has always voted the Republican ticket. The next section is Ford's Village. The members of the John Edwards Hose Company held a supper at their club rooms Saturday evening. The menu consisted of steamed clams, boiled ham, baked beans, cake, and coffee. Those in charge of the affair were George Sanborn, Edward T. Hanley, R.D. Prescott, and William Hunt. There were no sessions held in Cameron School Friday, February 4th, owing to the storm. The teachers' meeting, which was to have been held in the afternoon, was also postponed. The grammar school children of Cameron School enjoyed a sleigh ride through the adjoining towns on Wednesday. A concert. The Groton School Orchestra, under the leadership of Mr. Griswold, musical director of the school, gave its annual concert in Recreation Hall. Thursday evening, February 3rd. That's in the Mission Building in Forge Village. A very attractive and varied program was given, which was greatly enjoyed by the large number present. The next section is called An Hour More of Daylight. It is an interesting idea that is proposed to change the clock from May 1st to October 1st of each year so that time will be advanced 1 hour. In other words, on May 1st, we would all move the hands of our clocks at 5 o'clock in the morning, say, to 6 o'clock and go about our day's work. We would stop work at the usual hour, say at 6 o'clock in the afternoon. But instead of getting dark at 7 or 8 o'clock, it would not become dark until 9 o'clock. We would have, in other words, an additional hour of daylight, and yet we would have the same hours for business and sleep as now. But where we would gain is an earlier hour in the cool of the morning for work and an additional hour of daylight in the evening. The only point at which there would be a loss is during the night of the last day of April, when we would lose an hour's sleep. One can easily figure out what this would mean to the businessman coming home, especially if he lives in the suburbs. It would make outdoor exercise possible, too, after the evening meal. It would certainly be an untold benefit to school children in May, June, and September. The idea, at its first glance, seems foolish and impossible. But one cannot study it long before the tremendous advantages gained by the change become apparent. Of course, it is like cheating at solitaire. You cheat only yourself. But inasmuch as we must live by the clock, as we judge every action by it, it is certainly a pertinent question that asks, why not change the clock, particularly as we do not actually change time? It looks as if the British and Canadian parliaments would pass the bills for 1 hour of daylight, and it is an interesting question. Why shouldn't we do likewise in America? And that's the news in Westford for the week ending February 12th, 1910. Thank you for listening. Thanks to Ryan Cousins of WestfordCAT for providing technical support. You can find transactions and podcasts from the Westford Wardsman at our website at museum.westford.org or visit the Historical Society's Facebook page for more Westford news from a century ago. This is Bob Oliphant, and I hope you will join us for next week's Westford Wardsman podcast. Thank you.